Hello and welcome back to Try Your Hand. I'm Brenda and today we are going to be making a quilted pencil pouch. Let's get into the supplies. These will be the supplies that you will have in your kit when you pick it up. You will have 64 to 70 already cut out circles for your hexes. You will only need 64, but I believe I gave you extras. You will have a zipper, a sewing needle, a thimble, a roll of thread, and then you will have 10 pins and a lining fabric. Here are some things that you'll need that are not in your kit. You'll need a pair of scissors, a thing to mark your cloth. So if I'm using a water-soluble marker, but you can use like a pencil or something, or chalk, and a ruler or some sort of like straight edge. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to make our hexes. So you'll take your needle and your thread. The amount of thread you want to cut off is about maybe like 1.5 feet. And then you want to thread your needle with that thread. So you'll take your piece of fabric, your circular piece of fabric, and you're going to fold it in half, and then you're going to fold it in half again so that you have this kind of like wedge shape. Make sure that the wrong side of the fabric is facing you. And then you're going to pick up a little bit of fabric right at that corner with your needle. So once you have done that, you're going to pull your needle and thread through until you have a little bit of a tail, and you're going to insert your needle back in that section the same as before, and you're going to make a loop, and then you're going to insert your needle into the loop, making a knot. Then you're going to go to the edge of your circle with your needle, and you're just going to pick up a little bit of fabric, and then you're going to pull that thread all the way through. That should bring the edge of the circle to the center of your circle. Now we're going to insert our needle into that corner that we just made with the previous stitch. Then you'll want to pull on your thread until that corner and the center of your cloth meet. Continue all around the edge of your circle until you have a hexagon at the end. If you notice that this part of making your hexie is getting a little wonky and not really doing what you want it to do, you can use your finger on your left hand or non-dominant hand as a tool to help fold the edge of that hexie so that the center and the edge meet the way that they're supposed to. So once you get to that last corner, you'll kind of want to kind of fidget with it a little bit just to make sure that everything is nicely tucked in, and then you'll insert your needle into the very corner, the very tip of that corner there, and it'll do the same as before. It'll come to the center. Then all you'll do is sew and secure the middle of your hexie. I used my thimble to help me so that I wasn't tearing up my middle finger. And then you want to just secure it together and then make a knot. You are then going to repeat this process with all of your fabric circles. So this is how you're going to use your thimble. Your thimble should be going on your sewing hand on your middle finger. The thimble helps you protect your hand as you push the needle through the fabric. So you will hold your needle with your pointer and thumb, and then you're going to be using your middle finger to push the needle through the fabric. So now that we have all of the hexes sewn, we're now going to sew the hexes together. We're going to do this in rows to make it easier. So I'll show you how to sew one hexie to another hexie first, and then I'll show you how to sew the rows of hexes together. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the two hexes and have them with the right side facing each other, and we're going to then insert our needle onto one of the onto the very corners, making sure we catch both of the hexes, and we're going to sew in the same place a couple of times and then insert our needle into the loop to make a knot, and then we're going to whip stitch these two hexes together. So all I'm doing is just with my needle continuously going in through one side and coming out through the other side until I get to the very end of the edge of the hexie. When I get to that end, I'm just going to make a knot there to secure the thread and the hexes. So now that you know how to sew the hexes together, we are going to have to sew the different rows to make your bag. You will be sewing 5 rows of 6 hexes, 2 rows of 5 hexes, and 2 rows of 7 hexes. This is important to make the pattern for your bag. So now that you have all of your rows sewn, now we're going to have to sew them together. It is important for you to know the pattern in which we're going to be sewing them. We are going to be sewing a row of 6, a row of 5, then 6, then 5, then 6 again, 7, 6, 7, then 6. So we are sewing the rows in this particular order because when we fold it in half, those rows of 7 are going to be lined up with the rows of 5. Therefore, when we sew them, the edges together, it makes a flat bag. Okay, now to sew these rows together. It is going to be slightly confusing to explain, so hopefully you'll look at what I'm doing on the video. But what I did essentially was I placed both the rows down on the table where they were supposed to be if they were already sewn together. Then I very carefully flipped one of the rows over, keeping the first 2 edges that I'm going to sew together. That way I knew that was what I was going to sew. It is going to look really weird at first, but as you continuously adjust, like which edges you're going to sew, it gets less confusing. So what you'll do here is you'll just whip stitch those 2 edges of those hexagons from those 2 different rows together like we've done previously, and we're going to go from corner to corner. When you get to the end of that edge, you're going to make a knot there, but do not cut your thread yet. So once I was done sewing the first 2 sides together, I unfolded the 2 rows, made note of the next 2 sides that needed to be sewn together, and then I folded the top row down again so that those 2 hexagon sides were right sides together so that I can sew them. You'll want to continue doing this process until you get to the end of your rows. Make sure that when you're sewing the different rows together that you're sewing them in this pattern. Now we have to sew up the sides of the bag together. First thing that we're going to do is put our piece of fabric face up on the table, and then we are going to fold it in half hamburger style, making sure that all the hexagons on the top edge there are even. So just make sure that the points of the hexagons kind of match up. So when you match those hexagons up, you'll notice that you'll see some hexagons poking out from the sides of your bag. Those hexagons will then be folded and sewn into those little divots that the fabric made. So, but the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that it is in fact folded in half, and we're going to sew these together from the bottom up. If you see on that very edge there's a hexagon that's kind of like folded a little bit, we're going to sew that closed. The sewing process for that is the same process as all the other sewing that we've been doing. So now that we got to the edge of that, we now have to prep the next two edges that we're going to sew together. So I folded that hexagon in half, made sure that the two edges that I was going to be sewing next were together. This is going to be a little bit awkward to do for this first one, but yeah, you just want to make sure that those edges are matched up and held together really well so that you can sew them together and make sure that the bag itself is flat. So you just hold those two hexagon edges together and then sew like usual. So you're going to repeat that process of matching up the edges of the hexagons and then sewing them together all the way up until the very end of that edge of the bag. And then you're going to repeat that on the other side of the bag as well. All right, so this is what your little bag should look like when you are done with it. You still want the inside of the bag to be facing out for now so that we can sew the zipper and the lining into the bag. So the next thing that we're going to do is prepare the lining. So for the lining, we're going to take that piece and we're going to turn it so that the wrong side is facing us. It should be a bit bigger than your bag itself because we're going to be making a seam allowance. So I went around with my ruler and my fabric marker and measured all around the edge about 1/4 of an inch in for my seam allowance. So now that the seam allowance has been measured out, I'm going to then connect those little measuring dots that I made into straight lines. These are going to be my guides for when I'm sewing the lining together to prepare it to be put into the bag itself. So here I'm just making sure that my lining is in fact the same size as my bag. You want your the line from one of the lines to the other line to be the exact same size as the bag itself. Now that that's measured, I'm going to then fold my lining in half, right sides together, and I'm going to pin the edges closed so that I can start sewing the edges of the bag. I used about 3 or 4 pins on this bag. Your bag's going to be bigger, so I would use maybe like 5 pins per side. I made it so that the pin heads, the not sharp part, was near the line and the sharp part of the pin was facing away from me just so that I wouldn't prick myself. So the next thing to do now is to thread our needle and sew the edges of our lining together. With the technique we're going to use to sew the lining together is the back stitch, which is slightly different from the whip stitch, which is what we've been using. So to secure my thread, what I did is I inserted my needle into the fabric right on the line and I sewed in the same place a couple of times. Once the thread was secure, I inserted my needle down and then up right on the line of my fabric, a little bit away from the original stitch. That leaves a little bit of a gap between where my thread came up and where I inserted my needle. I'm going to go back with my needle and insert it right at the top of the previous stitch. And then I'm going to insert my needle back up in the fabric right on the line, a little bit further from where the thread is coming up. You are then going to repeat that until you get to the very end of your fabric. So to secure the end, I just kind of sewed in one place a couple of times and then made a little loop and then inserted my needle into that loop and made a little knot. And then I snipped off the thread. And then, of course, you repeat this whole process on the other side of your fabric. The next thing to do now is to sew in our zipper. Sewing in the zipper can be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to do my best to try and explain it here to you. To pin in one side, we are going to unzip the zipper and take one of the sides and pin it onto our bag. So the zipper, the wrong side of the zipper should be facing you, as well as the wrong side of the bag should also be facing you. Then we're going to take that little metal piece right at the end of the zipper and we're going to match it up with the edge of our bag. And we're going to pin that in place. So once you have pinned the one end of your zipper down, you'll have to pin down the other end of your zipper as well. You want to make sure that it's nice and straight when you do that. Otherwise, the zipper will be all like crooked and wonky when you have your final product. This zipper is way too long for my bag, but you will not have that issue. Your zipper should be the perfect size for the bag that we are making. So when you do pin the other end, it'll be pretty close to the end of the zipper. When you're pinning like the the length of the zipper, just make sure that what you're doing is done straight. I used the little like divots of the hexagons in the bag to guide where I was pinning my zipper. So for the other side of the bag and the other side of the zipper, it's going to be the exact same thing. You're going to want the wrong side of the zipper and the wrong side of the fabric to both be facing you. And then you're going to match up the little metal bits at the ends of the zippers with your pins and then pinning accordingly, just making sure it's straight like we did before. So now that the zipper is pinned in place, we are then going to sew it together. For this, we're going to also sew it together with a whip stitch. For this, just make sure that you're only catching the one side of the fabric. So what I did was I put my hand like inside of the bag to kind of help separate the two sides. That way I'm not sewing both sides together by accident. I was also trying to just catch the wrong side of the hexie so that my stitches didn't show up on the right side of the bag. But if it does, it's okay. So I was doing kind of smaller whip stitches, but really it doesn't matter. As long as it is staying in place, it should be fine. Of course, you will be doing this with both sides of the zipper. So here I made it a little bit difficult for myself, but in order for you to check if the zipper is working, you can flip your whole bag right side out again. I didn't do that. I should have done that. Just to see if it does zip correctly. Once you do that, just turn your project inside out again so that we can sew in the lining. Next thing that we're doing is sewing in the lining. So with the lining, you're going to turn it right side out. Then you're going to put the bag inside of the lining, and the bag is inside out. You want to then tuck the zipper all inside of the lining, and you want to make sure that the corners of both the lining and the bag are flush. So once the zipper is nicely tucked inside, in between the lining and the bag, we are then going to tuck in our raw edge of the lining. So the crease of the lining will be right on that line that we made previously when we were measuring out our seam allowance. Once everything is tucked in, we'll take some pins and pin the lining in place. and then we'll go all around the bag. Once everything is pinned in place, we are going to take our needle and thread and we're going to whip stitch the lining to the zipper and the bag. And we're going to do that like how we've done previously. I started at one of the creases and then I just went all the way around until I came up to where I started. Another thing that you can do, this is optional, is tack down the corners of your bag just so that the lining doesn't like move around and detach. So in order to do this, I just stick my needle in the corner of my bag and caught both the outside and the corner of the lining and made like one stitch. And then I made a knot. And then I did that with the next corner. After you sew the corners of your project, you are now done with your bag. I hope you guys had a lot of fun making this bag. I know I certainly did. If you want to send us a picture of your finished project, you can do that through social media or through our email. All those links will be down in the description down below. The next Try Your Hand will be a mirror light box. It's an optical illusion box. If you're interested in that, the link to sign up will also be in the description, or you can go through our website and sign up through our calendar there. All right, I hope you guys had fun. Until next time, bye.